Hello, and welcome to part 3, our concluding episode of Taming the Black Swan. My name is Mark Napier. I'm the Director of Food Events at Dubai World Trade Center. And today, what a fantastic day. Our timing is more by happenstance than deliberate, but the outstanding news that Emirates are opening back up and we're welcoming tourists back from the 7th of July, and the easing of travel restrictions from tomorrow, the 23rd, is a fantastic prelude to the signs of optimism that are hitting the market. I've received so many messages from our friends and colleagues in the food and hospitality and travel industries, genuinely excited by last night's announcement that things are starting to normalize again. But let's look back to when we first started this series. We talked about a Black Swan event, such an economic impact, such an effect on our personal and professional lives. Just for myself, I have 2 university-age children who are studying in the UK. They were telling me that the shelves were emptying, that it was difficult to find the most basic goods in a local supermarket. And I was very lucky that they managed to join me here in Dubai before the travel restrictions came in. So these are just things that hit us on a personal level, and I'm sure you all have examples of such stories as well. However, we haven't really felt that in Dubai. I walk into the supermarkets here, the shelves are well stocked, and it feels like another swan analogy to me, that there's a calm, quiet fortitude, getting on with the job, but probably underneath, paddling very hard indeed to make sure things are as normal as they are. So look, if you want to learn more about when our live events come back on the 3rd to 5th of November, please do check into gulffood.com and gulffoodmanufacturing.com. We will see a little more about the show and the travel requirements for you to come and join us in this wonderful city. I'm going to hand you over to John Defterios very shortly. Before I do, it's my job just to do some of the basic housekeeping bits. Today there is no chat function, so it's a simple Q&A. You'll see the opportunity to ask questions of the Minister, which will be fed through to John. Please do try and keep the questions to the subject matter at hand. You can also upvote questions that are there as well. So with no further ado, I'm going to pass you over to John Defterios, anchor at CNN, who'll be handling from here. Thank you very much, John.
Mark, thanks for the kind introduction and the thorough introduction in terms of outlining what we've been facing for the last 5 months. And it's a real pleasure to be involved with Gulf Food and the virtual summit here. It's an organization I've been following because it's been a pretty hot issue for the last 9 years since I've been living full time in the UAE, how to manage your food supplies, how do you prepare for such a shock. 10 years ago, in fact, in the region, there was a shortage of grains and particularly wheat, and people started to develop strategies of land leasing and growing their own products in the future. And perhaps that's allowed this region, and particularly the UAE, to better prepare for something like this. How do you prepare for a Black Swan event, a pandemic of this nature? Usually when we have an economic shock, it's in one region of the world, perhaps in Asia or the United States, Europe, or in this region due to an oil crisis. But we've never seen, in my 30 years of covering business news, a simultaneous shock at this level, even much greater than the global financial crisis we saw between 2008 and 2010. As Mark suggested, we're going to be taking questions, but the first 20 minutes, I'm going to do a one-on-one interview with Her Excellency, the Minister of Food Security, and that's a great segue into introducing her. Let's welcome Miriam Al-Muhairi, somebody who we've watched very carefully for the last 4 months in managing the crisis and working with the team of ministers that she has in partnership. Miriam, it's great to have you, and thanks for joining us for the full hour.
Thank you. Thank you very much, John. Thank you, Gulf Food, for having me. And I'm looking forward to our conversation today.
Good. I want to give people a kind of a snapshot, and it's interesting. I've been asking different ministers in our coverage over the last 4 months what it's like to deal with such a firestorm, if you will, because you can't, in a sense, prepare for something of this scale, right? I think it surprised everyone. What were your first instincts about preparedness when the shock came? Flights were shut down. It was difficult to make sure that product could get in. We never felt it on the ground here. So I was trying to explain to my wife, who's in London, and I shuttled back and forth. And I said, well, she said, it took me an hour and a half to get into a supermarket in London. And I said, well, you don't feel it. How did you have to respond to make sure the average consumer didn't feel the shock and have that panic of not having access to food?
Thank you, John. So before talking about that, I'd like to take us what you mentioned 10 years back when we also experienced a food crisis in midst of the global financial crisis. That really was also a learning curve, as is this one too. So every crisis is a huge learning curve for a country. And from that crisis 10 years ago, we actually set forth a lot of things to make sure to build a more resilient food system. So for example, we started developing the national stockpiles. We established the Food Security Alliance. This alliance basically consists of UAE companies that have invested in agricultural production and the global supply chain in the UAE and also outside of the UAE. Another step was the establishment of the Food Security Office and a minister in charge of the file here with you today. And after that, the next steps were to actually have a plan to ensure that we're not just food secure now, but also in the future, knowing what global challenges are lying ahead. From then on, we then had the National Food Security Strategy approved in 2018. And from then also the Emirates Food Security Council, which was established end of last year, which basically is the driving vehicle to implement the strategy and also to ensure if there were any gaps or issues in the market. So all these were basically steps that have been put in place because of the crisis we experienced before. Going through this crisis, as you mentioned, this was a crisis and this, let's say, dimension has never been experienced before. Sure, we went through a lot of learning lessons as well, but it was a real true test of what we were actually experiencing, or we had actually laid as a foundation for the food security strategy. So in knowing that we had already put programs in place, as you know, the National Food Security Strategy has 5 strategic directions, and the 5th one is all about emergency preparedness. So there were programs within the strategic direction number 5, and basically we could see, did these programs make sense? Did we succeed in them? Were there things we had to add or tweak on them? So it was a fantastic, let's say, and we still are in the crisis, but slowly, as Mark said, things are opening up more, but it is or was a true test to see if our foundation is working or not.
Great. What are the next steps then in terms of the next 10-year plan concretely? What do you hope to get accomplished to say, okay, we learned this 10 years ago, we learned this in the crisis right now, let's not sit on our laurels. What are the vulnerabilities, if you would you suggest, Minister, in the system, or are there any vulnerabilities?
Oh, absolutely. So going through this crisis, one of the first things we did was we met with the Emirates Food Security Council. We were really thankful that this council was already set up before the crisis. And when the airplanes halted and no more airplanes were going up in the sky, which was a very weird feeling for us here in the UAE, we made sure to understand, okay, is food still flowing into the country or the volumes that we were actually used to? So these are like the early warning mechanisms. We monitored this more frequently. We started monitoring global reports such as the Amos reports, global food balance sheets, to ensure, is there a problem in the availability of food, or is it just the supply chain? We had multiple conversations with the traders, ensured we had a diversification plan. So in case traders were not able to bring in food from certain sources, that they had alternatives that they could turn to. We coordinated with Emirates Airlines, Etihad Airways, to see if we could use certain repatriation flights to bring in food. So for sure, you didn't see all this, as thankfully all the supermarkets were well supplied, but there were a lot of things that were happening in the background, but through the coordination, it was a success. And now moving forward, what we can see is that the direction is definitely moving into ramping up domestic production as one of them. And I always tell the viewers, food security is not just about supply. We also have to look on the demand side. So supply is all about producing food, and on the demand side, it's about our behavior around food. So both these, let's say, both these systems need to be disrupted so that we look more into sustainable food systems on both sides. So moving forward, definitely ramping up local food production using technology, and also our behavior, how we can change to enhance the food security file.
Well, that leads me to the next point. You had a Ramadan Majlis with His Highness Mohammed bin Zayed, and not only did he praise your work and the steady handling of the food security crisis, but you also use it as an opportunity to say that we have to leave the environment of excess behind. Yes. And I thought it was a really poignant opportunity to say we have a role as a society, and we also have a role in the future of our next generations to eat better, not buy too much, not overindulge. What sort of influence will this have on consumer behavior, do you think, here in the UAE specifically?
So just to allow the listeners to understand that food security is not just about supplying food, but it's about what you choose. When you yourself go into the supermarkets and you choose the foods you wish to eat, and you choose how to prepare them, and you choose what to put in the bin at the end, this is all influencing the food security umbrella, basically. And so His Highness's words were, at the end of the day, food is a blessing, and we should appreciate food. We've been very blessed here in the UAE. I mean, we've got over 200 nationalities living here with us. We import over 90% of our food needs, and we cater for the needs of all the nationalities that are here. So we need to ensure that we respect food, knowing that it's come a long way. It's been grown with many people involved. A lot of resources have been put in place to be able to bring your food here. I'll give you a simple example, an apple, for example. And this is an example I tell my son. Throwing an apple away is not just throwing the apple as a food, but you're also throwing with that 70 liters of water that was used to grow that apple and bring it here. So in the discussions I had with His Highness, he really understood that it's not just about supply, but it's also our role to respect food, buy only what you need, try not to put edible food in the bin. And most people, because we've been at home and we're eating a lot more at home, we're eating meals at home, there's a lot more cooking going on. And I think knowing also that the first line of defense to any pandemic is your own immunity. People are much more open-minded about thinking about what they're eating. The UAE is very known for a very calorie-high diet, but very little nutrients. So we really need to build on this momentum now through this crisis to actually shift to more healthier alternatives as well, and be conscious about what we're eating.
I was going to ask you about that in terms of consumer behavior. This is a government that's really data-driven, and I'm sure you're pulling in data from
Yes.
the consumption levels. And I saw today, for example, the trade in the first quarter in the food industry was better than $8 billion, 31
Yes.
billion dirhams, right?
Yeah.
What are we learning from the data, would you suggest, Minister?
So what we're seeing, as you all know, the UAE is a global hub for food trade and has been for many years, and this is one of the things we're really proud of, and it's something we want to continue doing. In doing so, in the last few months, we've been seeing an increase to more than 25-fold in exports and re-exports, which actually shows how important we are in basically feeding our region. Usually we talk about a reach of 3 billion that we have from the UAE because of our advanced networks and all the channels that we've established on the global food supply chain. So some of the shifts we've seen, or some of the, for example, oranges. There's been a rise in the number of oranges being bought, and I think this can be related to that people are thinking of maybe indulging more oranges to increase their vitamin C intake for a better immunity. So that could be a reason as well. What we're also seeing is that food waste is a lot less. And I think that's because we're eating at home now and a little bit more conscious about what we're eating, also what we're spending on food as well. And also because we're having more meals at home, I also have seen that a lot more people are interested in actually farming at home. So they're asking us a lot about what we could do to achieve a certain percentage of self-sufficiency at home level. And because they've got a little bit more time in their hands, a lot of them are actually seeking to grow some foods at home. So these are some of the shifts or behavior patterns we've seen.
A lot to digest there in itself. One of the themes I've been covering as emerging markets editor is this tendency now under the guise of shortening the supply chains. Some are using it as a reason to go back in time against globalization and potential for protectionism. And the UAE stands out for me because, for example, His Excellency, the Minister of Economy, Minister Mansouri, said to me, we're one of the most globalized economies in the world. We would actually die without globalization. And then I think of a Hong Kong or a Singapore, the other rising city-states that have air connections, right? A global workforce, financial center, tourism center. What worries do you have from the food security front, though, that this could creep into the agricultural sector? Or are we not seeing it yet?
Look, I always like to ensure that listeners understand the difference between when we're saying we want to increase local production, it's because we want to decrease our dependency on net imports into the country. But this doesn't mean that we want to decrease imports. Okay, so there's a fine difference to net imports in the country and imports. The UAE wants to continue its journey on being the global hub for food trade and agribusiness, and this is a core pillar of why we are food secure today. But just as the journey goes and we understand the global issues that are happening with population rise, climate change effects, water depletion, desertification, and also our habits, due to that, we want to make sure that we build the resilience and ramping up our domestic food production. So we want to continue our journey of being a global hub for food trade and agribusiness, but we also want to start becoming also a hub of knowledge, of technologies when it comes to hot, arid climates like the UAE. I'm sure many of you have seen certain foods available now in the supermarkets that we would have never imagined having, and this is only possible because of technology. And so we as a UAE very much are similar to what's happening in Singapore. Singapore, like us, is a country that has the same ambitions. They also import 90% of their foods. They still want to be a global hub for food trade, but they also have some targets they want to achieve, like 30% more domestic, or they want to reach 30% domestic production by 2030. Singapore is very much similar to, or have the same ambitions that we have, and we are working actually very closely with the Singaporean government, exchanging ideas, experiences, and also because they have the same mindset as we have in prioritizing technology and innovation when it comes to food production, and also across the food supply chain to become more efficient, to decrease food waste. So they have the same ambitions as we do. I also often compare what we want to do with the Netherlands. So the Netherlands being one of the smallest countries in the world, but yet the second largest exporter of agricultural goods. And what have they done, or how come they've reached that? It's because of technology. So they've really gone into technology and efficiencies in domestic production that they've reached to this level. So for us, absolutely, we want to continue expanding our global supply chain, and also continue for us, it's part of our DNA.
Well, in fact, you'd have to be blind not to see the partnerships with China over the last 10 years, India, strategic partnerships, the air links into Africa. It creates opportunities. So at every stage now, and this is what I always say about UAE Inc., every time you go into a destination, you bring out the portfolio. Is food security part of that portfolio now with the leadership, where you say, let's not forget, this country is good for us as a partner here, and it goes to the top of the list of five, would you suggest, Minister?
Absolutely. I mean, in all the joint economic commissions that we have with other countries, every time a meeting happens, we always receive a notification. We're going to be having a meeting with this country. Please let us know what's on the food security agenda that we need. And I mean, we see this wasn't really, let's say, as a priority like before 5 years ago, but now you can see it happening all the time. I mean, just look at the last GCC meeting, which was done in April. Food security was actually the top priority area that was discussed as well. So it's on everyone's mind now. I'm sure viewers or listeners have also, food security is really a buzzword now. It's coming in a lot of media channels. Everyone's talking about it much more than they were before, which is great for us because it helps people, or it helps us to ensure that we are engaging our stakeholders, and we're using this momentum to educate more and to take more action. Good.
We have 30 plus questions coming in for you. You're very popular. So people want answers in the industry, right? We're not going to get through all 30, but there's some very prescient ones here. What is the UAE plan to support local producers and small and medium-sized enterprises after COVID-19? Is there a plan to keep them alive, because you don't want companies going bankrupt or not having the financial wherewithal to serve the population?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. This has actually become, I would say, one of the top priorities within the programs that we have. I don't know if some of you have heard, about 1.5 months ago, the cabinet approved a national committee for developing ag tech in the UAE, which I'm honored to be leading with stakeholders from the government sector and also from the private sector. And we are now working on a blueprint, basically, to submit to the cabinet by end of August. And in this is all the ideas that we have on policy changes, on regulations that may be hindering the transformation that we want in ag tech, how we can ensure we're bringing ag tech, but also incorporating small and medium-sized farmers into this. We really need to transform the agricultural landscape in the UAE. Now, with technology being available and so many pillars of growing food. Let's take a look at growing fish in the UAE. You've got the recirculating systems, which are land-based systems, and we're now able to enjoy high-value marine fish and are able to buy them in the supermarket. So they've got a competitive price too. So we're really pushing the bar when it comes to technology, and really want to help. What are the means, either policies, incentives that we need to put in place to basically develop the sector even more. So it's all in the pipeline coming up, and we hope that some announcements will be made in a few months' time.
You spoke about technology and the role here, and I had one viewer text me and say, there's a global food tech challenge here driven by the Catalyst Accelerator. So you're trying to not just take care of SMEs and some of these importers, but you're looking at the next generation. What are we finding here in terms of this competition? Is it the real deal? Is there something going to come out of it?
So for us, it was basically hitting a few things in one go. Number one, we wanted to get the youth also involved and looking into how we can use technology to disrupt certain elements in the food supply chain. And we're not only looking at growing food, but also maybe when it comes to waste or logistics. So this Global Food Tech Challenge was launched in September last year. And it's been developed with our office together with Taming from Abu Dhabi. And we basically wanted to make sure we got the youth and entrepreneurs and researchers excited about showing some of their technologies, and especially things that would be suitable for environments such as here in the UAE. So His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid was with us when we launched this Global Food Tech Challenge. And it's really been exciting because we had, I think it was over 1,000 entries, but it came down to about 400 that really qualified for the conditions we had asked for. The 12, let's say it's brought down now to 12 finalists, and in September it will be, or the 4 winners will be announced. So there's an extensive evaluation team behind it, but it's so exciting to see the engagement of the community. So we're looking at it from a commercial side, but also on a household side as well.
Great. Let's go back to some of the questions here. Which products will be the highest need for import in the near future? This is from a global online networking group for exporters and importers. Did we learn something through the crisis where there is a need?
So we started off, when we developed the strategy, we started off with the Uae Food Baskets. And with this, we identified which foods make sense to grow in the UAE with the technologies that are available, and which don't make sense to grow here, but could be bought from elsewhere, but then also stored in the UAE. So definitely things like grains, sugar, oils are things that don't make sense yet to grow in the UAE. I know that you've seen also on the news some of the trials that we've had on growing some grains here in the UAE. Again, this is the beginning of a journey of the R&D that's needed to be able to develop technologies further for the future. But if we talk about right now, the technologies that are available make sense for growing vegetables, growing fish. Sheep and goat sector is something that's very interesting here. Poultry, eggs, these are all areas that technology is available, and the prices would or are commercially viable and are competitive enough for the market that we're in. All the other things, it makes sense to buy or to import from outside and store here.
I've been following the water industry for the last 25 years, and one of the questions that was fed through is that as the Minister of Food Security, should it be one of your priorities to say that product or this basket of products is too water intensive and it's just too expensive for us to desalinate the water supply and to go into that direction? Are we getting that sophisticated to say, hold on here, let's not go down that path?
Yes, our national food security strategy is aligned with the water security strategy. So the water security strategy was approved a year before our strategy was approved. So we're in alignment with them. So they've dedicated a kind of water budget for the food production sector. But we are, and of course in that strategy, it's not just about desalinated water. We're also looking at treated wastewater. Also looking at, for example, how brine could be used to grow foods. As you know, there's a lot of research institutes in the UAE. One of them, for example, the International Center for Biocell and Agriculture, that are looking at what crops can be grown using salt water. And I often say, if we can use our 3 S's, the sun, the sea, and the sand, to grow our foods, this is the kind of research and development we should be looking at for future foods as well. So definitely the water element is taken into consideration. And when I say if something's commercially viable, it also takes into consideration the cost of water, and to ensure that, because water is a precious resource for us. So does it make sense to grow this here? That's why technology is also so interesting here, because now with the closed system farms where you're able to control the conditions of your crop or where the crop's growing in, you're able to recirculate the water. There are some technologies that recirculate between 95 to 98% of water, which is really good for us here. And this is exactly what we're looking to really push, and it's within the strategy as well.
Good. A lot of very interesting questions here. One is, and I know we wanted to talk about the hospitality sector. What is your view on the upcoming time for hospitality and traveling opportunities and challenges? but also just giving a breath of fresh life to the hospitality sector as a result of Dubai on the initial, but we see both Etihad and Emirates expanding their flying network footprint all of a sudden. How do you balance this out where you say to the hospitality sector, you know, you rode with us, you survived it, you actually diversified your business. This is what's ahead for you. What do you think is ahead for them?
What doesn't kill you makes you stronger, right? So definitely it's been a challenge for them, along with many other sectors as well. And but I believe that now there's a little bit of light, I think, at the end of the tunnel, also after the announcement yesterday. I think it's a great opportunity also for the hospitality sector to kind of like rethink or reprioritize some of the, let's say, menus that they want to focus on. At the end of the day, you've got to start attracting people to come. I think it's a really great opportunity to start looking at local production and seeing to bring in more local production, because I mean, it is a fact. I've tasted some of the foods myself. I mean, when you're looking at kale, for example, imported kale hardly has any taste, but the kale that's grown here in the UAE, because it's fresh, it actually has taste. Same goes for there's blueberries now from the UAE. Strawberries are coming too. So there's a whole array of products that are coming up now, and I'm sure some of you have seen it. I can only encourage the hospitality sector to attract or to try and pull in local production more into their menus. Try also to look at how sustainability can be more incorporated in what you are doing. I feel people are a lot more interested in that, and they kind of want to support that more. Also, maybe showing how you're reducing waste, food waste. I think we are all becoming more concerned about what's happening to our planet and the living things, and are starting to question more where food is coming from. So I think it's a great opportunity for you to rethink or reset what it is, or who you want to attract and what it is you want to serve as well. So I tell you, don't worry, light is there at the end of the tunnel. And I think you've been through the worst, Kate, or the worst section of what we've been through right now. And if you can survive this time, you'll be stronger coming out on the other side.
Yeah, and I think it's fair to say the government is trying to be as responsive as possible. We saw the cash injections and liquidity put forward, but do you think in your instance, when you look at your portfolio, and there's questions that are fed through this way, that it should be targeted to the hospitality sector, to the food sector, to make sure they can survive this crisis? I mean, we're looking at a global contraction of 6% this year. I've never seen that in my lifetime, right? Not in one market, but globally. So what do you think is necessary, and what is the government's role? It's not a cradle to grave survival strategy where we help you do everything, but what's the important measures that the government can help with, do you think?
So it's a bit of a domino effect at the end of the day, because everything is interlinked and connected. And when you help a certain sector, it kind of is a domino effect across the whole supply chain. From food security side, from food security office side, there's a lot of focus now going into the primary industry, so the producing of food. There's a lot of nudging and sort of education and awareness on the behavior side. But I do see that probably we'll have to do a little bit more on the hospitality sector side, because I mean, being closed for the last few months really means you have nothing to actually work on. The only way was to either go e-commerce or try to tap into some new channels. I know some chefs came together and they kind of helped in delivering food. So these were innovative ideas to ensure that business was not completely stopped. But I do see there is a need to sort of build the confidence in the people to actually say, it's okay, go out, enjoy your food now, because the last few months it's been no, stay home, stay home, stay home. So even though we're opening up, you still feel people have that fear of going out. They're still not confident. So it's our role as well to say, measures have been in place, as long as you keep certain conditions of physical distancing, et cetera, you'll be fine. And I think once, give it a little bit of time, people will gain that confidence. And I also feel now summer coming up, I know the airport has open, flights are open, but I think still a huge number of people will decide to stay in the UAE and do a kind of staycation. And I think this is where the hospitality sector can also benefit. So yeah, those are some of my intakes of how, but I do agree with you, John. I think there is more we have to do on the awareness side and how we can actually encourage people to go out and eat.
Yeah, so we were joking amongst a very small bubble of friends right now because you're limiting who you're seeing because of the
Yeah.
COVID-19 crisis. We didn't know how to behave when we first went back to a restaurant. It's been so long. A serious question, and again, I'm looking at the stream of questions that are coming through. If somebody orders in, for example, we don't do that very frequently, or you buy the different food, is this an opportunity to say, wow, we're just wasting so much on packaging? I know you have to protect the product, right? But the level of napkins, the level of plastic forks, the size of the bags, the plastic bags, the packaging amongst the imported foods, what considerations being made now to say we could do what, 20% better, 30% better? Do we need to mandate it? What's your insight so far? I know it's early days, but I'm sure you've taken a look and said the same thing. This line froze a little bit, guys. I'm not sure if the viewers can hear me, but we're waiting for the line for Her Excellency to unfreeze, right? So she's got a question there, and we'll hope it does. We've gotten a number of different questions. In fact, we have up to 72 questions in the pipeline right now. I'm hoping the line for Her Excellency Mariam Al-Muhairi unfreezes there. And we will go back to her, of course, when it does. Mark Napier, are you on the line as well? Did you want to jump in?
Yes, hi.
Thanks. We got a frozen line there from Miriam, and I was just suggesting that we have now 78 questions in the pipeline. The question I posed to her, and I'm not sure if you can get your video up at the same time, Mark, I'd love to hear from you. The question I posed to her, and maybe I'd love to hear your thoughts on it, have we learned a lot when it comes to packaging today and food waste? What is the next initiative? Does your membership see the need here to learn something from this pandemic and a greater awareness on what goes out on a delivery to someone's house, but also the packaging around the food that we see in supermarkets? What do you think is going to be the exercise here?
Okay, I'm back. Sorry, I'm not sure what happened there.
Okay.
Right. I'll just
Okay,
jump back out.
yeah, no, that's all right. Miriam, I posed a question to Mark, and it's the
Yeah.
same question to you. Mark, you want to give us your input, and then we'll go back to Her Excellency. Give us your thoughts.
Of course, look, we've got a trade show running 3rd to 5th of November, Gulf Food Manufacturing. We're anticipating over 1,200 international suppliers to be exhibiting. Here they're talking about some of the things that are actually going to drive these improvements forward. They've seen just such an enormous increase in packaging in the same way that I was talking about to the UK and some of the countries, almost looking at a panic buying of food stock. Many of the local production companies were trying to protect their packaging supplies because they were ramping up local production. So of course that is a huge catalyst for investment and local investment into our local manufacturing supply chain. So yeah, it's definitely one of the things that we're all looking at. And one of the things that we have to consider, of course, is because of the climate, some of the innovations that are coming through in terms of packaging to protect, to keep longer, to keep safe, to keep fresh, to ensure that foodstuffs that are traveling quite some air miles are in fantastic condition by the time they reach you and I as consumers.
Fair point. Thanks for jumping back in. Minister, did you hear my question? I didn't know before the line froze up about packaging and then waste on delivery, because we see all the different restaurant chains delivering things, but then you open the box, you're like, oh my goodness, there seems to be a lot of waste. Is that part of your next level of thinking?
So packaging is actually with the Ministry of Climate Change. They're the ones in charge for packaging and all the environmental impacts of that. I mean, definitely we can see that this pandemic has increased our use of plastic. Even in the supermarkets, there are a lot of retailers that pack everything in plastic so that it avoids basically that people are touching the food, and in case there is any contamination that gets into somebody else's hands. Also us, we're using masks now every day. This is also, so there's definitely an increase in let's say packaging waste. On my side, what I really want to encourage is how we can use food waste, for example, for packaging. And I actually saw at Gulf Food last year, which was amazing. They actually made out of kiwi, they made forks and knives, so out of kiwi skin. These are the kind of innovations that would be fantastic to see, because not only are we encouraging the circular economy, but it's actually something that's biodegradable and at the same time still also has the safety feature as well. There's also a company in the US, Appeal Sciences. They've now come up with a fantastic kind of like a layer that they put around vegetables and fruits, which is all safe, but in a way it increases shelf life by I don't know, 3 to 5 folds. So these are the kind of innovations that we really want to see, and it's our duty as a government to facilitate a kind of ecosystem to bring in such technologies and innovations to the country, to start looking at how we can solve these issues of packaging and increasing shelf life.
It's a work in progress. One of the questions I had on my list to ask you, and I see streamed through our questions, which have grown now to 95. So I don't think we're going to get through all of them, but they're all really good ones, and they're hard to pick from. But one of them is, how does AI and the Internet of Things apply to traceability of food, the sourcing of it, the quality, the chemicals used? I think we're on the cusp of something quite radical, but I didn't know when that's going to hit the food chain as you see it today, Minister.
Yes, no, absolutely. AI is going to play a huge role, and its advantages already includes applications of machine learning, improving inventory management by utilizing forecasting engines with AI, chatbots being able to streamline operational procurement, enhancing data robustness through natural language processing, which is NLP. Also optimizing logistics by using driverless vehicles, for example, that improve efficiency and reduce human labor costs and add an element of environmentally friendly operations and reducing lead time as well. So AI is gonna, and in conjunction with blockchain, is gonna be creating a quantum leap in the efficiency of global food supply chains. And we're already seeing these taking action.
There's a question here about localization because of the higher cost of manufacturing here, because we don't have the land around us to grow proficiently or easily, let's put it that way. Is the government considering subsidizing the food sector? Is it getting to that level here where we really want to foster local production, where it requires a partner in the government, or to pool resources where the sovereign funds say, yes, this is strategically important, let's go in that direction?
Look, we have to be very careful with subsidizing, because subsidizing is not sustainable. But what I do believe in, if the UAE wants to really become a technology hub for growing foods, there is a certain transformational support that this sector may need. So this transformation support is where the government can step in and maybe ease a few things for a certain amount of time to help the private sector be able to scale up. It's extremely difficult when you're just small, and usually ag tech is quite a high capex cost as well, involved in it as well. So you're not only having a high capex cost, you're having to also get into the market. There's a lot of things, and then you don't have the scale of economy that many other countries have, because we're in a way just starting this industry. So I do believe support is needed, but it's not a it shouldn't be a long-ending subsidy support. It should be something that helps this transition for a short time, and after that, things should be running in a sustainable manner.
Again, it's a longer question, but I'll see if I can boil it down here. It's that some people say they're inventing the technologies and they can bring it to market. And this is not just a challenge in the UAE. I've heard it literally the world over, particularly in the developing and emerging market world, where you have competing, if you will, ministries that say, okay, the Minister of Food Security says, I want to get this to the market. And then a regulator comes in and on the other side, it says, no, it's not quite ready, or it hasn't screened through the Food and Drug Administration type organization we have here. Do you find that you're working in unison with your fellow ministers, or can it be streamlined and more efficient to get these things faster to the market?
So the Emirates Food Security Council has been a great help here, because in that council, we actually have all the, let's say, concerned ministries. So there's 7 ministries in that council with all the local authorities from each of the 7 emirates, and also a youth representative. So it's a huge council, and this is where such discussions are taking place. And for us, for technology and innovation to boom, it doesn't make sense to say, we want this particular technology, because technology is changing all the time. And for different foods, there's different technologies. So we want to keep it a little bit open on the technology and innovation side, but we want to ensure that at the end of the day, the customer can enjoy a safe product as well, and that the customer sees, has that transparency, that traceability to know where this product has come from as well. So I think for us, I mean, I tell a lot of people, when I first got this file, there were 3 directions as Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid gave me. He said, make sure we have a plan, which is the National Food Security Council, make sure we adopt technology, and advance R&D. So those were the 3 directions he wanted us to focus on. So we really want to ensure we're sort of at the top of the game. So I'll give you an area that's for us still a little bit new here, cellular agriculture or cultivated meat. Some people may find this a little bit like, oh, no way, how I can't eat meat that's made in a lab. But when you think of the science behind it and you see, okay, cells are taken from an animal, it's still living, it hasn't been killed, and this cell is put in a bioreactor. And by the way, many of our foods are made through fermentation and things like that. So you're putting in a bioreactor, you're giving the cells what it needs in oxygen, in a warm environment, and then the cell multiplies and grows like it would in the animal. But you're in a way divorcing this product from the animal. So there's, you're not using so much water, you're not using any arable land, the carbon footprint is much lower, but at the end of the day, you're still getting a product that looks, feels, and tastes like the real thing. So this is, for example, an area which is still quite new for us here in the UAE. It's emerging mostly, you're seeing a lot happening in the US and some other parts of the world. So it's starting to pick up as a clean, in a way, a clean food, because it's kind of takes the equation of growing your meat in an animal away. And, but this is as well something that we have to start introducing here to the UAE and making people aware of what's in this, exactly how is it made. But I think eventually these kind of technologies, so cultivated meat, alternative proteins, algae, these are the kind of things I hope to see in the UAE, because we have the right environment, we have the right, let's say, mindset for that kind of direction.
Looking through the different questions here, the list has grown and we're chipping away at it. But one of the words that keeps on coming up, if I was going to do a word search, is what sort of support are you willing to give? And I think sometimes there's this perception that this is a wealthy country, has oil revenues, the whole Gulf region creates opportunity. Do we need to get people to think outside that mindset? I'm not saying because of the COVID crisis and the recession, that's in a different category. But always the view is, well, we have this technology, they have arid land, they have money, they should hand it to us. And I'm just being absolutely blunt, but do you find that there's a long list of people looking for support?
There are a lot of people interested in investing in ag tech in the UAE. A lot of them are not sure where to start. It starts with, what land can I build my facility on? Which emirate do I go to? Electricity and water rates are different in each emirate. For example, Abu Dhabi has actually a fund for ag tech companies, and that's for the Emirate of Abu Dhabi. So there's a lot of different things happening. And as I mentioned earlier in our conversation, this national development team now for ag tech, we're actually exactly putting this blueprint out of what initiatives, what support is needed, what legislation, policies need to be put in place to really drive ag tech to the next level here in the UAE. So it is work in process, because it is very difficult. I mean, I've got great ties with all the producers here in the UAE, especially when it comes to ag tech, and it is very, very competitive for them. It's not an easy market. It's because the UAE has thrived on free trade, open doors for bringing food into the country for so many years, and it's thrived on this channel of food that now, as the domestic sector or the domestic production sector wants to grow, it's finding it really hard. Just as an example, you've got Fish Farm who are growing sea bass, and yet Fish Farm have to compete with sea bass from, let's say, the likes of Greece or Turkey, where there's huge economy of scale, and they're able to bring into the UAE that same product, but at a much lower level because of the economy of scale that they have. So it's extremely difficult for a small company in the UAE compared to the huge scale they have in other countries to compete. So this is where we have to help, and this is what I meant with the support and the transition phase to then scale up. But again, while we develop this, we really have to take care of focusing on the foods that make sense to grow in the UAE. And this is where we take, for example, the water, the amount of water that's used into consideration.
There was a question here, and it's we have about 8 minutes left, and I wanted to ask you a couple other questions after this. But how do you share information? Is there a destination for those who are looking from around the world and say, I'd love to hear what is a priority for the UAE government on food security, but what are the ideas coming out of the different universities? What's the latest technology they're adapting? I didn't know about the incubator, great challenge that you've got set up. Yeah. What's a good repository for the information share here in the UAE when it comes to food security, would you suggest?
I agree with you. There's much more we need to do on the communication plan. As a small strategic office, at the moment, the channels we have available is our website. You'll see an infographic of the National Food Security Strategy, our initiatives. We also have a food research platform, which we announced actually just in the beginning of this year. And this is where people can actually apply or register, and they will see what research is being done in the UAE when it comes to food security. And this sort of builds the network of researchers, and then people will know which institute or which university is doing what research. This was an initiative we developed in the Food Security Office because we could see a lot was being done, but kind of like in silos, as it happens mostly. And we needed to make sure that we provided a platform so that people have a bit of data as to what's happening around them. Also, when we did the Accelerator program, which was in early 2019. So this Accelerator program was a government accelerator initiative. Again, us as a small office, we said, how can we make use of all our stakeholders and accelerate to try and remove barriers of why ag tech is not developing as fast as we'd like it to develop in the UAE. It was great. We had 100 days and we came up with 10 new initiatives, and His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid was there also to launch these initiatives. And for me, this was the beginning of ag tech in the UAE, and it really pushed the bar to get people to actually look at the UAE to invest in ag tech, because they could see the political will, they could see the direction was there, this is what we want to invest in. And with that, all the programs that are happening, it feeds into this transformation that we want to go through. So we really want to become a hub of technology and knowledge for hot, arid climates like the UAE.
One final question for you, if I may. If you look in the neighborhood now and you see a country like Pakistan going through challenges, India with the COVID crisis, Jordan's gone into agriculture, Egypt, some that are nearby, Tunisia, right? Algeria. What can we do with the sovereign wealth of the country to say we could shorten our own supply chain by working in our neighborhood more effectively? Is there a kind of a partnership model that you think, because they have vast lands and they're in your neighborhood, they're partners, they're strategic partners as well, that you could not have to search very far to get the agricultural supplies into the country easier?
Look, we have, as I mentioned earlier, we have the Food Security Alliance, which are the UAE companies that invest mostly also outside the UAE. They, of course, do their due diligence whenever we have any joint economic commissions or meetings with other countries. We get them to, because a lot of the countries do come to us and say, we have land, the channels, the logistic channels are available. Why don't you invest in our country? Of course, we need to, there's a lot of, let's say, back checks that we have to do as well. Number one, of course, it needs to be a B2B, it needs to make sense from business to business. Is it a profitable business case? And second, what we've seen in this crisis is many countries suddenly put up restrictions, okay? And these restrictions, some were announced at the WTO, some were not announced at the WTO. And we need to make sure that whenever we do an investment abroad, because at the end of the day, these investments are done. So sometimes in business as usual, it doesn't make sense to bring those goods to the UAE because they're far or there are alternatives closer to us. But in an emergency situation, we should be able to access those investments as well. So what we're seeing here is that moving forward, people will look into how that country reacted in the crisis and whether it makes sense to invest there or not. So they will be looking at a lot more factors than they have been looking so far.
Okay, I think we'll have to leave it there because of timing. I wanted to give you 1 minute to say, as a young minister and one that had a portfolio that was looking more towards the future, and then you had to live life in the absolute intense presence, the present moment here because of the challenge. What did you learn personally? I think people would love to know your insights.
Yeah.
Did it feel like a tsunami that was coming and you could ride the tsunami? Or I'm sure it tested every skill in your toolbox. What did you go through?
First of all, I have to thank all our stakeholders. I mean, even the traders, the government representatives, my family, friends, so many who really have helped shape where we are in today. And I say this because it started when we started to see what was happening around us. I just remember saying to my team, okay, let's get together. Let's be proactive. What's going to happen? We know that we're dependent on these global supply chains. When containers stop moving from China to other places, it's like a domino effect again that will have an impact on us. So let's get in touch with so and so and so and so and see if they are feeling everything and anything. Is anything happening? I mean, we know that, and this is normal for traders. There's a buffer as well. So there were instances that we experienced of a few days of certain food commodities not coming into the country. So we did experience that. And it was really, I have to say, the great partnerships that we have with other governments, also our leadership. We're so blessed with how our leadership have really taken the subject of food and medicine. And as His Highness said, it's a red line. And really, it wasn't just words. There were so many actions that happened behind the scenes that enabled food supply to run smoothly without any or extended time of not coming to the country. For me and my team, it was such a steep learning curve. I think what we've experienced in this time probably was a lesson learned for something like 3 or 4 years. You wouldn't be able to learn what you've learned in this time because it really came to the essence of, okay, we need to call and we need to take action now. It wasn't something, okay, let's wait till tomorrow. We were working throughout the weekends. Actually, there were no weekends. You didn't have a time feeling anymore. So really a great lesson learned. My team is quite young as well. So for them, a fantastic learning experience. And I can only thank everyone and all the stakeholders. And I know there are a lot of traders here. I can only thank all of you for supporting us here, for being patient with us at times when there were certain things happening and we weren't responding so much. I'm sure all of you have experienced a lot of the emails and phone calls on data collection, where every crisis, as I said, is a learning curve, and we really wanted to make sure that moving forward, we're also learning from some things that we saw as gaps, and data was a huge thing as well. We had a lot of lag in the data. So for example, we'd only have data that was maybe a few months old, but now we're actually getting real-time daily data from everyone. So I have to thank everyone for that. And really it's because of the traders here, because of the hospitality sector, that we are also so strong in our food supply chains, that we've gone through this crisis strong. So thank you very much to everyone.
Great, that's a good place for us to finish. I wanted to thank Mark and the team from Gulf Food for organizing this and the preliminary chats that we had. It was very useful. 114 questions. I think we got to about 30 of them. I think you're going to need a big gallon of water afterwards, yes. Minister, because it was rapid fire for a full hour. Thanks a million. It's great to see you. I look forward to seeing you in November, if not a lot earlier, but at the Gulf Food actual seminar where we see everybody face to face. But I got to say, this works pretty well. And there's a lot of good feedback. We're using the hashtag GulfFood or GulfFood2020 if you'd like to feedback or share the thoughts of Her Excellency Miriam Al-Mohari. It was great to see you, and thanks again for your time.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Mark and the team at Gulf Food, and thank you to our listeners and viewers today, and keep safe. Thanks.
Yeah. Thanks.